will record now. Sorry about that. I'm not used to doing the recording, but we will make sure to send this as well as the entire slide deck to you all, or to our contacts with the Washington School Counselors Association. So that way you all will have all of these slides and all of this information at the touch of your fingertips. So initial eligibility requirements. We're going to start with standardized test scores. So GPA and core course requirements remain in place as they were pre-COVID-19, pre-pandemic. But in January of 2023, so January of this year, NCAA Divisions I and Division II adopted legislation to remove the standardized test score from the initial eligibility requirements. So we no longer require an ACT or SAT score to complete the NCAA initial eligibility certification. Now, we do not require that here for the NCAA initial eligibility, but we do still want to highlight and make sure that you all are highlighting to your students and your prospective student athletes that the NCAA school that may be recruiting them, they may still require that standardized test score for them to be admitted or to receive certain scholarships. So make sure that students are still doing that research of what do they need to take the standardized test score for, even though they don't need to take it for initial NCAA purposes. So NCAA doesn't require it, but that does not mean that the school itself or specific like departments within that school or even scholarships don't require that. So we don't require it, but the student athlete may still need it. So moving on, we've got Division I initial eligibility requirements. So the first thing is student athletes need to earn 16 earn 16 NCAA approved core course credits in the following areas. So for English, 3 years of math, and that has to be at Algebra 1 or higher, 2 years of science, and if your school offers a lab, at least one lab, one extra year of English, math, or science, 2 years of social science, so history, psychology, sociology, anything of that nature, and then 4 years of any of those previously listed disciplines, so English, math, science, social science, or world language, comparative religion, or philosophy. So in that additional bucket, the only thing that can be approved is world language, comparative religion, or philosophy. Now, world language for us does include American Sign Language if you offer that. But I also want to highlight on that world language note, student athletes do not have to take a world language. This other bucket, this 4 years of other bucket, does not require things for it like world language. You could take any of the other courses listed, any of the other content areas listed, or in addition, you could also take world language. So after those 16 approved core courses, then students have to make sure that 10 of those 16 core courses are completed prior to the 7th semester, so prior to the start of their senior year, and 7 of those 10 have to be in English, math, or science. And this is specific to Division I. So I will start there. This is one thing that is specific to Division I. Some of these other things are a little bit, are kind of in both Division I and Division II. Complete 16 of your NCAA approved core course credits in 8 years. So basically you have to finish in those 4 years, starting from when you start 9th grade. Students have to earn a minimum 2.3 core course GPA. So that 2.3 has to be in those 16 core courses. So we often see students will sometimes kind of start to struggle a little bit because of their GPA on their transcript says that they have a much higher GPA than what the core course is being calculated at, because they might be including those electives, their PE, their weightlifting, art, music. While those are very important classes, they don't meet those core course criteria. So that 2.3 is specific to those 16 core courses. And then finally submit proof of graduation to the Eligibility Center. So that's for Division I. Then we'll move into Division II. So Division II student athletes also have to earn 16 core courses, or have to take 16 core courses, but the breakdown's a little bit different. So instead of 4 years of English, you'll have 3 years of English. Instead of 3 years of math, you have 2 years of math, but that's still at Algebra 1 or higher. 2 years of science, including one lab if your school offers it. And then here's where they make up that extra English math. So there's that extra bucket where it's English, math, or science. So you have to take 3 years there, whereas in Division I, it was only 1. Social science is still 2 years. And then again, that other bucket. So any of those other content areas, English, math, science, social science, or world language, or comparative religion, or philosophy. And again, that world language does include American Sign Language. For Division II, the GPA is just slightly different. It's still within those 16 core courses, but it's a 2.2 as opposed to a 2.3. And then finally, submit proof of graduation to the Eligibility Center. So again, that 10-7 split, that having to take 10 courses by your senior year is not a part of the Division II requirements. All right, then moving into Division III. Division III schools actually determine their own initial eligibility. So they get to determine what they want to use for academic requirements, admissions, financial aid. So that's completely separate of the NCAA Eligibility Center. The one thing that is a part of the NCAA Eligibility Center is for international student athletes. So if an international student athlete plans to compete at the Division III level, the student athlete has to complete an amateurism only certification account. So it's not that academic piece. So you wouldn't be required to provide them with a transcript. Just for a note, student athletes that are from the US and have taken all of their schooling in the US are able to complete a profile page, which is free. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. And that's just to get some great information. But if a student athlete from the US who is only taking coursework in the US wants to play at a Division III school, they are not required to have an NCAA account of any kind. All right, so now we're going to kind of switch into some program and core course requirements. We're going to start with non-traditional courses. And I'm going to touch on this briefly, and then I'm going to provide a little words of wisdom, suggestions, if you will. So for us, again, non-traditional courses are online, distance learning, hybrid, blended, independent study, individualized instruction, correspondence, or similar means. If you can't tell by this definition, it hasn't been updated in a while. And we are currently in the process of doing that. So any of those things will need a separate review. Now, those kinds of coursework were being used during the pandemic. So if at any point a student athlete took a course in spring of 2020, all the way up until August 31st of 2023. So as long as a course was completed prior to September 1 of 2023, that coursework will be used, whether it's online, distance learning, whether you've had the program reviewed, whether it's not, whether the program's approved, or whether it's not, it will be used. Anything pre-spring of 2020 and then after September 1 on or after September 1 of 2023 is subject to a separate non-traditional program review. And we look at specific pieces of our legislation to make sure that it's meeting those requirements that the colleges and universities say they want met. And if you have a program that hasn't been reviewed, then you can call that number that's on your screen now and ask for a review. And I'm going to put a little asterisk here because some advice would be if you currently have student athletes enrolled in that online program, get the program reviewed. If you don't currently have student athletes who are taking those online courses, wait until August 2024 and then call to have the program reviewed. Because like I said, we're working on making this more modernized. That'll just fit there and fit with the more modernized legislation that we're anticipating. The last thing that I want to say and make sure that I mention is that if a program has already been approved, been reviewed, and it's been approved, it will continue to be approved. You don't need to get it re-reviewed, even with the legislation change. That will carry over. All right. So now we are moving into Amy's portion. So I'm going to pass it off to her to talk about the core course review process.
Great. Thanks, Kaylin. I just wanted to let you know that Kaylin and I are monitoring the chat, but as we're presenting and chatting, it could be, just give us a moment. Kaylin will answer the question about mastery-based learning, and I will come back to the Running Start classes. later on in my presentation. So Kaylin, if you'll do the mastery-based one, I'll touch on the other one later. Just keep popping them in the chat and we'll get to them as we get them. All right, so as Kaylin mentioned, I'm going to talk specifically about the core course review process. This is probably the thing that's probably most impactful in that the work that you're doing with your students is what are those 16 core courses that students can use in that initial eligibility certification? How do those courses get approved? How do they live on a list? What's a core course? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. My team is beholden or subject to review courses under two pieces. Number one, that's the NCAA core course legislation. And I'll talk about that in more specific detail in a minute. And then from that legislation, which is given to us by our member colleges and universities, our committee, which is made up of individuals from the post-secondary and secondary world, they have provided us criteria for individual course review itself. So it's a two-step review, one using legislation given to us by our colleges and universities, and then one criteria that's provided by our committee that is made up of individuals from that college community, but also individuals who are in that secondary space, such as yourselves. So first, let's talk about that legislation. In order for it to meet the legislation, number one, the course would have to qualify for graduation requirements in one of the areas listed below. So English, math, science, social studies, world language, and then comparative religion or philosophy. So we're looking for courses that fall into one of those buckets. The course needs to be considered four-year college preparatory, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that exactly means in a moment. It needs to be taught at your high school's regular level or above. So if your school offers multiple academic pathways, so perhaps you have a college prep level 1, a college prep level 2, an honors, an AP, and IB pathway, whatever that standard college prep level is, that course needs to be taught at that level or above. And then finally needs to be taught by a qualified instructor. So let's talk about what do I mean by college preparatory. When we were actually creating our criteria with our committee, that was the first place we started. What does that mean to be college preparatory? What does that mean for the NCAA? So in order for courses to be considered college preparatory, a course must provide students, I'm reading directly, the academic foundation for successful completion of academic work at four-year college. Well, what does that mean? What we're looking for is when we review a core course, we're looking for a balance of two things. The content, so the meat of what the students are learning about in that course. But more importantly, we're looking about how are they demonstrating the mastery of that information. So we're looking at those performance assignments, assessments, and tasks. So those two things married together is how we define what college preparatory is. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about those two pieces of the puzzle. As I alluded to previously on the slide before, is number one is the course content. What are students being asked to know? Those learning outcomes, those competencies, maybe the content standards as defined by your state. That's the left side. And then the right side is with that course content, what are students being asked to do with it? So we're looking for things that are asking students not just to like spit back or regurgitate information or facts, but we're actually looking for students being asked to apply that knowledge or that skill in the real world, perhaps, or to think strategically about that particular content, or to think or extend that information to other areas or other content. So we're looking for a marriage of those two things. Now, obviously, we know that in foundational courses, an English 1, an Algebra 1, a Spanish 1, that students probably have a little bit more of that rote memory because those are the building blocks of that content. But even within those like foundational courses, students should have some visibility of those application of skills or strategic thinking as they navigate the course. Obviously, as students progress through a particular course sequence, so we'll go with Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, or English 1, 2, 3. We should see layering of more and more of those higher order thinking skills because students have gotten that foundational base and they're adding to their knowledge as they continue. So this is actually a snippet from our high school review committee's, our core course supplement for core course review. And as you can see, there are two sides here again. So this is a snippet of the course content that we use when we review courses that are submitted that are film literature in nature under the subject of English. So on the left, you see a column labeled sufficient for approval. On the right, you see a column that's labeled not alone sufficient for approval. So if my team were to review a film lit course and receive documentation from the school as the course description, outline, examples of assignments and assessments. We are looking for more of the content to be covered on the left side of this than the right. We're not saying that the right can't be there. So if students were covering a little bit of studying film history, film genres, they were looking at design, set design. If that's then the course, that's fine. It just can't be the primary focus of that course in order for it to be determined to be core and meet our criteria in order to be approved to live on your list of core courses. This is a publicly viewable document. When Kaylin sends these slides, all these links will be clickable. It starts on page 47 of our policies and procedures. The first 46 pages, you're more than welcome to read. If you're ever having a problem falling asleep, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of, I like to call it television instructions speak. But the meat of the bones that will probably be most valuable to you is the part that starts on 47, where we break down subject area by subject area, and then course title by course title, that criteria that makes a course either approvable or potentially not approvable to live on your list of core courses. So I want to go over the different types of core course reviews. First and foremost, schools that submit for the first time. These are schools that either are new schools, so schools that have just come into existence in the last couple of years who are submitting titles for the first time, or these are schools that have existed for a while, but maybe just never had a student athlete, so they never had a need to have an account with us or have a list of core courses. So when you submit courses for the first time, we take the catalog, the course catalog, program of studies, whatever your school or district may call it, that you provided through the school review process, and we cross-check those titles and descriptions with the course titles that you provided in your initial submission. Provided they match and they're core, we could move those courses to approve. Generally speaking, best practice when you submit titles, and not just for the first time, but in general, when you're submitting titles for addition to your list, you want to submit the title as it appears on your transcript, because that's how it works. We take your core course list and then the transcript that the student presents to us, and we match them. If course titles are truncated on your transcript, or there's abbreviations or whatever the case may be, sometimes that may make that matching a little difficult for our team. So we may have to follow up with a question to make sure we know what course you're referring to on your transcript. So best practices, I would always advise to submit the title exactly as how it's going to show up on your transcript. The second type of submission, and this is probably the majority of the folks joining us today, are schools that are submitting updates to their current list. That could be adding new titles. That could be archiving titles that were previously approved that you are no longer teaching, or that could be changing existing course titles. So perhaps your school offered an English 1, 2, 3, 4 option, but maybe for the 24-25 academic year, school has decided, you know what, we're going to actually do a more thematic approach to our titling. So now English 1 is called English literacy. English 2 is now called, let's say, British Lit. English 3 is American Lit. English 4 could be a series of electives. Whatever the case may be, if you need to make updates, you can do that through that second process. And then the final process, which is only happens, I'd say about maybe 20% of the time, is if you submit a title and we're not exactly sure what that title is, and we're unable to find information on your school's website or through the course catalog or program of studies that you provided previously as to what that course is, we may ask your school or invite your school to provide additional information. And I'll talk more in detail about what that additional information encompasses. But the idea here is, rather than us making assumptions about what a title is, we'd like to invite information so that we can make sure that we're making the correct decision for your students and for your school on that initial review. So with the core course review steps, so like we talked about previously, when we get an initial course submission, we're taking that core course legislation coupled with that criteria for review, along with the context of your school's current list, and deciding if that course can be approved, if we need additional information because we're not exactly sure what that course is, or we know that that course does not meet our criteria for review, and we'll render those decisions. It's important to note, I think there's a misnomer out there that, well, we hear both sides of it, that we just approve courses on title alone, or we ask for information on every course. It's actually a blend of both. So believe it or not, we do have a little common sense at the NCAA, just a little. So if a school is submitting courses like English 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's a standard high school that has an account with us and there's no issues, we're going to approve those titles on title alone most of the time. The reason being that it just doesn't make good sense to ask every time what English 1 is or what American Lit is, because we know what those courses are. And like I said, also, we have your catalogs, or we can find your catalogs. So if we do ever have any questions, we can verify that. However, there are times when schools are rolling out new courses or being creative in their course titling, and we can't find information. So we have to ask, tell us more about a course called Jack and Jill Ran Up the Hill to Fetch a Pail of Shakespeare. We're going to ask what that is. So that does happen periodically. And like I said, it's about 21% of the time last time I pulled the data. The idea there is just we want to make sure we're rendering the right decision from the get-go. Kaylin's answering questions and navigating, so there's a slight delay. So I appreciate your patience with us. So if for some reason we do ask for additional information, this is the information we're asking for. It's all course specific. As a counselor, it may be easiest for you to work with either your department chairs or the teacher of record for that particular course to pull this information. If you are the individual who's monitoring your list of core courses. So we're looking for a course description. We're looking for a flow chart if applicable. Most of the time when I say if applicable, that is if it's a sequence course. So a lot of times we need these for math courses. So the standard progression is Algebra 1, either Algebra 2 or Geometry, then the other one of those. And then students can go a couple different ways: discrete, pre-calculus, statistics, calculus, so on and so forth. If we see titles like intermediate algebra or algebra connections, we may ask for a flow chart to see where that particular title fits in with your regular pathway. So that's what we mean by a flow chart. It's just when there are sequential courses, where that course fits in the broader scheme of things. Probably the thing that's most beneficial to my team, these are these bottom two, and that's the detailed outline of course content. So what is the actual content that students are using or being asked to master as they navigate through that course? A big thing I encourage best practices: don't photocopy a table of contents of a book. I know book sounds weird in this day and age. Most of our things are through ePads and learning devices, but we do occasionally get table of contents, and they're not super helpful because I don't know about you, but when I taught, I never got through the full table of contents of any chemistry book in the 13 years I taught. So that really doesn't tell us exactly what students have been asked to do. It just gives us a list of everything they might do, but not necessarily what they actually did. And then the other piece of the puzzle is that those 3 major sample assignments and assessments. Another good best practice here is, because remember we talked about we're looking for assignments and assessments that demonstrate higher order thinking. It might be really easy to grab that midterm or that year-end final. However, a lot of times, I don't know about you, but when I was giving those, I had a very short window to flip around those final exams to finalize my grades for posting. So a lot of times those assessments aren't super rigorous, if you will, because there's a lot of, I'm going to go with old school with the Scantron, but there's a lot of multiple choice, fill in the blank, matching. Doesn't really show higher order thinking necessarily. So instead, I would defer to providing things like, if it was an English course, perhaps a writing prompt with a rubric that shows how students will be assessed on their writing. Or for a science course, perhaps a lab. Or for a math course, maybe it's a project that shows how students are using a particular math concept in the real world. So we're looking for assignments and assessments that are showing how students are applying or extending the knowledge beyond just rote memory. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that not approved decision. So initial decisions and reason codes are always posted to the portal. So if you submit a title, like I said, it's either going to be approved, we're going to ask for additional information, which gets the RC8 code, or it could get a not approved decision. There are 4 not approved decisions that will open a portal, and that portal will allow you to provide additional information if you do not agree with the not approved decision. And those 5 codes are listed down here below. From there, you are able to provide any of the additional information I mentioned on the previous slide. So that course description, a flow chart if applicable, the course outline, and course assignments and assessments, if you feel that, no, this course really does meet that criteria, so I want to provide additional information. You have that opportunity. That portal opens for 60 days. If for some reason that portal were to close within your 60-day time period and you wanted to re-engage, you're more than welcome to do that. You could do that one of 2 ways. You could either resubmit the title and we can reopen the portal, or you can call into our customer service and ask us to reopen that portal for you as well. So I just wanted to make sure that you are aware there is a deadline for documentation submission. Mainly the reason we close it is so we don't continue to ping you with an email saying you have an open portal. But if for some reason it closes and you'd like to re-engage, we can always do that for you as well. It's important to note the most common reason that a course is not approved on initial submission is that RC 17, and that's that one that says does not meet core course guidelines. So if you've submitted a title and you get that decision, I would encourage you to go to those high school policies and procedures, that supplement that I started on page 47, and actually look for that title and see what is sufficient for approval and what is not sufficient for approval, so that you are best able to provide documentation that shows, yes, indeed, the course does meet the criteria. Okay, so then now once you've submitted documentation to us, we would then review the course documentation to determine if indeed that course information provides information that tells us, yes, it does align to both our NCAA legislation and the core course criteria. And if it is, then we can approve that course. However, if after review of documentation, the decision is still not approved, you will receive a detailed email from my staff that will tell you two things. Number one, why the course did not meet the criteria, and they will cite a specific page and specific tests within the criteria, and they will link it so that you can refer to it. And if anything wasn't provided, so let's say only a description was provided, but no outline and no specific assignments and assessments, they'll note that as well. So that if you choose to take one of the next two steps, either the decision inquiry process or the reevaluation process, you'll know exactly what you need to speak to in terms of the criteria, and also if anything was missing, what was missing. With the next steps, the decision inquiry is simply an opportunity for you to provide additional information that maybe you didn't provide the first time. If you don't agree with the staff's decision, if you read the staff's decision and you're like, okay, that's correct, the primary focus of this course is on, I'll use economics for financial literacy. That's a big one right now. If the primary focus is on that financial literacy piece, so budgeting, crediting, how to pay bills, balance a checkbook if people still do such things. If that's the main focus of that course and you're like, okay, we get why it doesn't meet the criteria, we're going to come back, we're going to make a couple of tweaks to that course. So maybe more of the focus is on that economics piece, then you would do that reevaluation process. Okay, I saw earlier, we're going to get into special scenarios, and maybe if there's more than one, I apologize, but I saw that we have a middle school counselor joining us, which I'm super excited because I'm going to touch on this a little bit. And then also I know there was a previous question about college courses. There's two of them that will be covered in this special scenarios piece. So that's I've been excited when I saw this too in the chat. First, let's talk about grading scales. For any school that reports numeric grade scales on their transcript, we need the high school or district, whichever the case may be, to tell us what your grade scale is so that our staff knows how to convert the numeric to an alpha, because that's what we use. We use alpha to convert to quality points. So A for 4, B for 3, so on and so forth. What I did want to highlight today, which is something I don't know that a lot of schools and districts are aware of, is that we are able to use weighted grade scales for the initial eligibility process. This can make a big difference in students' GPA calculation, particularly when you talk about students who may be receiving an extra full quality point for taking an honors or an AP or an IB course. So weighted grades could be used for initial eligibility purposes if the title has some kind of a weight designation in it, honors, pre-IB, AP, IB, so on and so forth. It cannot be added to dual enrollment courses. And that's a big one that everyone always asks about. The reason it is not added is because that dual enrollment course is the college's course. So we're not weighting something on your list. We would be weighting something on a college list. So weighting is not added to dual enrollment. And then weighting can only be added in terms of quality points after numeric grades have been converted to letter grades. So weight cannot be added to numeric grades in terms of a multiplier. So if your weight is already added to your final grade calculation, we're not going to add weight again because you've already added the weight to the grade that's reported. However, if your weight is added after the fact, then it's possible we could add up to 1 full quality point. If your school weights more than one quality point for a particular level, we will award the max of 1. We do have schools that award maybe 0.5 for honors and then 1 for AP and 1 for IB. Whatever the case may be, we will defer to your quality point weighting, provided it does not exceed 1 quality point. And then if you're interested in seeing if your school currently has weight on file, you can actually log into your account. There's a section that will say grading scale. If that section is blank and you do offer weight, it means we do not have that weight on file. To submit weight, it's very simple. It's very simple. You just have to, on a school letterhead, send us your official policy for weight. Make sure you tell us when it was implemented so we know when to make the effective date. And then email it to the email listed here. And obviously, like I said earlier, Kaylin will make sure you get these slides so you'll have this information available. And provided that it meets the requirements, we should be able to add it and you'll get notification that the weight has been applied. Another special scenario, this is the one I was teasing a little bit earlier. I got ahead of myself like usual, are pre-9th grade courses and dual enrollment courses. So high school courses completed prior to the start of 9th grade can be used in the initial eligibility process. 2 things. Number one, it has to be on your list of approved core courses. We see this a lot with math, world language, sometimes with, I believe Washington has a Washington State history course that could be used. So we will use those courses provided they are on your transcript with a high school grade and high school credit. Also, we can use dual enrollment. So in just this case, those would be those running start courses to satisfy the NCAA core course requirements as well. Same idea, needs to end up on your transcript. It needs to have high school credit. That's really important because the college credit, we don't need the high school, excuse me, we need the high school transcript. We don't need the college transcript because that credit value isn't going to tell us how to convert like 3 hours or 5 hours. We need your transcript with how you awarded it credit so we know whether we're awarding it a full unit, a half unit, whatever the case may be. And it still needs to be a core course. So it still needs to be in the areas of English, math, science, social studies, or that additional category, which would be those world languages, comparative religion, and philosophy courses. So yes, students who are accelerating their learning either on the front end in pre-9th or who are accelerating their college coursework completion in high school, those types of courses could be used for the initial eligibility process. Okay, I'm going to transition back to Kaylin and I'm going to jump in the chat because I have a feeling some of these are waiting on me.
Not too many. I think there's just one that I'm going to defer to you because of your expertise.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we are moving into some school counselor best practices. So I'm hoping that you all will get a lot of good information here. And I love that already in the chat, you all are talking about who uploads courses for your school, because for every school that's a little bit different. And so I'm glad that you all are having that conversation. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the NCAA registration types. So the reason I have this in the school counselor best practices is because you all meet with your students regularly. And so this is just one thing that if you have a student athlete or a student athlete that wants to play at the NCAA level, this is something that you can just ask to see if they've done. So we've got 3 different account types and we'll talk about each one individually. So first is that free profile page. And this is a great place to start for really any student, whether they know for sure they're going to play Division I or Division II, or maybe they don't know, or so maybe they'll play Division III, or maybe they don't know if they even want to play college sports. This is a great place to start because 1, it's free. And then with that free account type, you get the student athlete will get information about how to manage their time as a student athlete. Here are the requirements for those initial eligibility academic requirements, and other information that will just help them be successful as they're kind of navigating that recruiting process. It's also the great place if a student athlete for sure, again, has taken all of their coursework in the United States, and they want to play at a Division III school. This is a great place to start just so that they can get that information. And then if they want to register, if a student athlete wants to register for an NCAA certified non-scholastic basketball event, so think our basketball academies or other events that are linked here, they have to have at least this type of account. So that gives them that 10-digit student ID code or student athlete ID number. And then these accounts can be transitioned at any time. So if for sure starting in junior year, they're really getting recruited by Division I or Division I or Division II schools, and they know they're going to need that certification account, then they can transition it and pay that fee at that time, as opposed to paying it before they even know for sure if they need it. So I always say free profile page is a great place to start. And we even suggest having freshmen or even as young as 8th grade registering for these types, just so that they can get that information. And hopefully in 8th grade, they get that information that, hey, freshman year matters and you need to be successful in those classes, even in starting in your freshman year. All right, so then we'll move into the academic and amateurism certification account. So this is the account type that is required for a Division I or Division II student athlete. And they have to have this account type if they want to go on an official visit or sign a national letter of intent or receive an athletic scholarship. So all of that this account type is required before they can do any of those things. And then there is a registration fee for students in the United States. It's $100 for international students. It's $160. And I will say that there are fee waiver criteria, and we've got that information in the slide. And we've got information linked as well. So we'll provide some more information about those fee waivers. And then the last account type is the amateurism only certification account. And I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier in the presentation. And this is required for all international student athletes planning to compete at a Division III school. So international student athletes competing at the Division III level have this amateurism only certification account type. The registration fee, again, is $70. And again, there are fee waivers available. And this also could be the right account type for student athletes transferring from a 2-year school, so a community college or a junior college, to an NCAA Division I or Division II school, but they may not need an eligibility center academic certification, but that is hopefully not your problem. But you all build such great relationships that you might have a student after 2 years at a junior college, they may come back to you to ask those questions. So just in case, there's that information that this may be the right type for them. But again, they should talk to their compliance officer on campus to make sure. All right, and like I said, fee waiver criteria. This is all of the possible fee waiver criteria out there. I'm not going to read it all to you because you all can read, and you are going to have this presentation, and you're going to have the slides and the recording, so you all can read this on your own time. But it's some of the things that you all are probably used to when looking at fee waivers for things. So things like free and reduced lunch, if they receive or are eligible to receive an ACT or SAT fee waiver, and so on and so forth. All right, so I have this kind of broken down into some best practices for all high school counselors, and then some best practices for those school counselors that are specifically responsible for managing the core course list, and they're the primary and secondary contact on the school account. So for all school counselors, make sure that you know which courses are NCAA approved before students are enrolled in them, and make sure that you know how to tell the student athletes where to find those core courses, because like Amy talked about, the core course criteria is publicly viewable, so are your core course lists. And so student athletes can look at those core course lists prior to coming to you for scheduling, and they can say, okay, I've already looked through this list. I know these courses are approved, so that's why I want to take these courses. Just as school counselors, because you all are meeting regularly with student athletes, you can kind of help assist the student athlete in navigating the recruiting process. We are not asking you to take over the recruiting process. Really, it's just helping the student athlete understand the recruiting calendars. It's not taking over and being a part of the decision-making process and making sure they're getting to their visits, or they're communicating with their coaches, but really just kind of checking over an email, making sure that the grammar and spelling looks great, and just helping them navigate that recruiting calendar. Reminding students to register with the Eligibility Center. We just talked about those account types. And like I said, since I know you all are meeting at least once a year for scheduling with your student athletes, that's a great time to just check in to see if they've done that. And then reminding students to apply to NCAA schools recruiting them. We have found that sometimes student athletes think that just because a school's recruiting them, that means they've already gotten in, so they don't need to do the application process, but just remind them that no, they still need to do that application. Now I included this screenshot specifically to help student athletes and help you make sure you know how to guide student athletes to finding their list of core courses. So the biggest trick is if you go to eligibilitycenter.org, it's not obvious where the high school portal is. It's not obvious where you search for the high school courses. It's that high school administrators button up in the top right corner. Once you click on that, then it takes you to the high school portal, and there's a tab that says list of high school courses, or list of NCAA core courses, and they'll be able to search your school from there. But that big trick is just going to eligibilitycenter.org and clicking on that high school administrators button in the top right. All right, so we talked just briefly about recruiting, and we just want to give you a little tips and tricks here. The first thing is just, here's some questions for student athletes to ask. And I always like to say, make sure you tell your student athletes, ask these kinds of questions of the head coach, of assistant coaches, if they play a team sport that has position specific coaches. So football quarterback coach, running back coach, or baseball pitching coach, anything like that. Ask them of those specific position coaches. And then also ask these questions of current student athletes. They'll have a good idea of the mental health resources on campus, hopefully. And they'll be able to say like, hey, I haven't used them, but the coach always encourages us to use them, or just things like that. So these are some great questions to ask of a variety of people on campus. Some more recruiting best practice: encourage your student to talk with their support system about what level of competition they think the student should aim for. Really, what's going to be best for the student athlete, both academically and athletically. You all are great about helping students find the college that's the right fit for them, and this is just another piece of that puzzle of finding the right fit. It shouldn't be Division I or bust. Really looking at where are you getting the most scholarship money? Where are you going to get the most playing time? Looking at those different pieces and making sure that student athletes are kind of keeping all of those things into perspective. Remind them to check their emails. I don't know about you, but my students, when I was teaching, they did not check their emails very regularly. So just remind them to check their emails. Encourage them if they don't really know where they're interested in attending, use our interactive map here, and then help them research admissions requirements, just like you do with your typical students, and then remind them to research their division and sport-specific recruiting periods. And we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. So here's NCAA Division I and Division II recruiting calendar. It is to promote well-being and ensure fairness among schools. And so here's the definitions of the different periods of what can and can't be done. So now you have hopefully a better idea of, hey, I should be emailing the coach right now because they can't come and watch me play, and just helping your student navigate that calendar as they look at the sport specific calendar and say, okay, well, they can email me right now, but they can't come to the school. They could text me right now, but they can't come to any of my games. So just making sure that they know, so that they don't get stressed out that a coach isn't coming because, well, maybe they're in a dead period and the coach can't come to the school. And then we've got a link to the calendars down there. And then recruiting best practices. Again, just kind of helping them craft those emails. Best practice would be including the student's name, the position that they play, and their 10-digit NCAA ID number, as well as their graduation year, and when they plan to enroll, like starting what academic year. So fall of, in this case, it would be probably 2024 if we're saying fall. And then remind them to take official and unofficial visits to the NCAA schools and just kind of look through and find that best fit. And then encourage them to conduct themselves in a positive manner because coaches talk. This is a relatively small community, and so coaches will talk amongst themselves. So just make sure that they're conducting themselves in the best manner on those visits. In college admissions, like I said earlier, again, student athletes, just because they're getting recruited does not mean they've been accepted. So make sure that they are completing that application process and asking either their compliance officers or the financial aid or admissions office about cost of attendance, financial aid, whether or not standardized test scores are required, and things like that. All right, now for my primary and secondary contacts, you all have a few more duties than just a general student or general school counselor. Keep your core course list up to date and review those policies and procedures that Amy's already talked about. Submit your non-traditional programs for review. respond to any open tasks on the high school portal, upload transcripts, and attest to fee waivers. So if you are new or you need to change the account, if you can get in there, get into and log into the account, great. And you can then change your contacts from there. If you don't have access to the high school portal and you need to change the contacts, there is on the high school portal, you can go to the resources page and there's a high school contact change form, and you can then change your contacts so that way somebody at your school has access. And then in that high school portal, that's where you would manage your core course list, submit fee waivers, review open tasks, and view other student reports. So in the task tab, that's where you would complete any of the assigned tasks. And I do want to just point out that in there, if you click on the My Documents, you can also see what you've already uploaded, or maybe another school counselor or another contact, whether it's I saw in the chat, an athletics director, what they've submitted for the documents. You can see what's been submitted. So that way, if we have some follow-up questions, you know exactly what's been submitted. And there is a tutorial of just like best practices for how to manage your school's tasks. Student reports, this is where you would go to upload transcripts or attest to fee waivers. So you would search by your graduation year, and you can view all the registered college-bound student athletes that have indicated that they have or do currently attend your school. And this is where you would upload transcripts. And again, there's a tutorial for uploading transcripts. And just a quick hit, uploading transcripts to the high school portal is the most efficient route. It takes about 30 minutes once you've hit that upload button, but that is faster than sending it via email or by the mail. And then in that student reports, again, that's where you would go to that fee waivers tab and submit and attest to those fee waivers for students that are requesting the fee waiver for the certification account. Now we're going to get into resources. We've also have 9 minutes for questions. So I know Amy, I don't know if you have any currently in the chat, but if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to kind of advance. We've got a subscribe to the high school newsletter here on the left by the QR code. Some great resources that we have. The guide for the high school counselors is phenomenal for helping you all. And then the guide for the college-bound student athlete is fantastic if you would like to either print something or just share it with the student athlete and say, here, this is your role. The big thing is school counselors, you are already doing so much and then some. Pass off some of the information, make the student athlete lead their recruiting process. And the best way to do that is to provide them with the guide for the college-bound student athlete, because that can help them take hold and really manage that process. The initial eligibility flyer is great just to have up in your office, or maybe to print out and put in your coach's mailboxes to have up in their offices or up in the locker room, just so that they see those initial eligibility requirements and remember that academics are an important part. And then high school portal, as well as just an intro to the portal if you've never been on there. And then we also have, like I said, time for questions. We do have this QR code to a short survey. I think it's 4 questions, and one of those is, what state are you in? So I know school counselors, you all like to use data. We like to use data too, and we are trying to track on that to make sure that we're providing the best information that we can for you all. And again, I want to say thank you for taking the time during your lunch hour. I'm sure there are several of you that have had students, not even student athletes, students come in because that's the kind of counselors that you are, and you always have students, I keep saying student athletes, but students in general, you just have students coming to you because you guys are so great. So just thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to spend an hour with us and learn some stuff. And like I said, we will send the slides and the recording to Lauren and make sure that you all have that. And I'm not seeing any additional questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I just wanted to let folks know I'll be sending a follow-up email to y'all with the slides and that information. I also will give you information related to getting clock hours for the event. And just a reminder for folks watching the recording, you also will have an opportunity. The difference for folks watching the recording is there'll be a short quiz at the end for them as well. But if you are here in person, there's not a quiz for y'all.
And I'll advance it back. Okay, I think we're good. I don't see anything. We do have a high school specific support line. That's at 877-622-2321. And it's available 8:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. But if student athletes or parents have questions, send them to this other number. That's for them specifically. I'm gonna take it back to the survey just in case anybody last minute needs to scan that QR code. All right, thank you so much, everyone. And we hope you have a great day. It looks like most people, oh, we've got something. If you have any events coming up for families and students, can you also include that in the follow-up? Absolutely, we will include that. We can also include links to recordings of previous presentations as well.
I'm going to selfishly tease something. This is Amy again. I'm not going to turn my camera back on. This may not impact many of you, but we do have our first ever webinar focused on homeschool students on December 13th. It will be recorded, but if you go to our www.eligibilitycenter.org and you go to the resources tab, you can register for that, or not. You can register if you like as well, if you're interested in how homeschool students are, how they navigate this process, or if you have students in your school that are homeschooled or were previously homeschooled, you are more than welcome to direct parents to that, because we do not expect you as their school counselor in a brick and mortar school or in a virtual school, if that's the case for you, to be responsible for that. So I just wanted to tease that a little bit, but I'll make sure that Kaylin sends any information for other upcoming student specific, coach specific, or parent specific webinars outside of that homeschool one. But I selfishly did want to plug that. If you want to spend another hour with me, come on in, we'll talk some homeschool. But just again, I know I put a thank you in the chat, but I just want to echo thank you again for joining us today.
I want to make sure no other questions. All right.
Perfect, Kaylin. If you want to stop recording too.
I can do that. I just have to, there it is.